It's time now for Countywide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join News Director Paul David and News Editor Philip Catalfamo as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics in Yavapai County that affect all our lives. And now here's today's Countywide.
Welcome back to another episode of Countywide. I'm your host, Philip Catalfamo. I'd like to thank you for joining me. On today's show, we're joined by Yavapai County Adult Probation Senior Adult Probation Officer Paul Ventura. Mr. Ventura, welcome onto the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
No, we are very happy to have you. And we're going to start just kind of in general. What is probation? Just in general, what is it?
Sure. Probation is to make it as easy as possible for everybody to understand is in lieu of going to prison. So someone has committed a felony. The vast majority of people on a Superior Court is where I work. Vast majority of people that have gone through Superior Court have a felony, or that's what they've been convicted of. We do supervise some misdemeanor crimes, but they, instead of going to prison, so in lieu of going to prison, they place them on probation to be supervised in the community for a period of time. Okay. The average probation sentence is 3 years, so they're allowed to stay in the community. There's a set of rules that the court puts forth that they have to abide by, and the probation officer is there to enforce the compliance with those rules. Okay. So they're called the conditions of probation. There's 16 standard conditions, which seems like a lot, but they're pretty basic things that if you read through them, you would say, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
What are some of those? Just some of the easier ones.
The first one is do not commit a new crime. And so if you commit a new felony while you're on felony probation, that's obviously not good. And, right. And a lot of times those people will end up being sentenced to prison. So they'll be sentenced to prison on their probation case and on their new case. So by being placed on probation in lieu of prison, that means that prison sentence is still there. Okay. If you do not comply and you have your probation revoked, what's called being revoked, then you can be sentenced to prison. And you don't necessarily get your time that you were on probation. So if you had a 3-year sentence and you had been on probation for 2.5 years, you're not getting 2.5 years off of your prison sentence. Mm-hmm. You're still getting sentenced based on the sentencing guidelines by the state. Some other normal ones, counseling. Okay. So usually there might be a specific counseling that the court wants the person to do, but the conditions allow for the probation officer to send someone or refer someone to counseling for a specific thing. If we see something that we feel like might be a need, mm-hmm. No alcohol, no illegal drugs, drug testing, right. Of course, having a stable residence. So one of those things that people might not think of is instability in your residence actually leads to criminal activity. That's one of the factors. Okay. It's a lower factor, but it's one of the factors. So we require that people have a residence that we can access. Mm-hmm. And that they don't change their residence without prior approval from us, so that we can say, yes, this is a good place for you, or maybe this isn't the best place for you. You
talked a little bit about it when we first started, but the difference between supervised and unsupervised probation, sure. What is that?
Supervised probation is usually it's someone who has had a criminal history, but there are people who don't have any criminal history. They've committed a felony, and the judge believes that the supervision is going to help them. So they put them on supervised probation, which is through the Superior Court. Superior Court also has unsupervised probation. Usually it's a lesser crime, usually misdemeanors, and they just want the person to do counseling and pay a fine, and then they get off and we have an unsupervised caseload. There's a lower court, city court style, municipal court probation as well. Mm-hmm. I don't believe they have a lot of face-to-face. I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know a ton about it, but I don't think they have a lot of face-to-face contact with the person that's on probation. Part of our requirements is face-to-face contacts, residence contacts, so we are out in the field.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe that we can go into a little bit about where the probation officer plays into this, because my understanding of I guess the probation process is very much that is, like you said, can't commit crimes, you got to kind of keep your nose clean in a figurative and literal way depending on the situation. Sure. I was just I always kind of assume a probation officer was somebody who's just kind of lurking around, kind of like keeping tabs on somebody, not like a PI, but sort of like a low-grade PI maybe, but
Sure.
maybe you can kind of clarify a little bit more as to where the probation officer fits in and how you kind of keep track of people who are on probation, because a probation violation, people who leave the country,
Right.
people who leave the state, probably people who leave the county
Yep.
in certain situations. So let's talk a little bit about that. Where does a probation officer fit in kind of just keeping track, or maybe just in general, of the probation process?
We use a multitude of ways. So we will do some telephone contact, a lot of face-to-face, whether that's in an office or at their house or sometimes in the community. There's a few different levels of probation. So there's intensive probation, which is what I supervise.
Okay.
There's what we call standard probation, and then there's minimum supervision. The minimum supervision, the person has shown themselves to be really low risk to reoffend, really low need. They've complied for a significant amount of time, and so they don't really need the supervision anymore.
Okay.
We don't really see them face to face at that point. We talk to them a few times a year. Standard probation, they have to see everybody once a month, and that's face to face once a month. Some of their probationers, they're seeing twice a month, so they might see them in the office and then at home. And then there's quite a few where they'll see them once a month, but maybe that's an office visit, but they're going out to their house every 2 to 3 months to verify things there.
Okay.
With intensive probation, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's very intense. And so each person on intensive probation has to provide a weekly schedule that tells me exactly where they're going to be throughout the week at
Right.
every moment. It's considered house arrest because if they're not at a place that they've been approved to go, then they need to be at home. And I see people from anywhere from 2 times a week to once every couple weeks, depending on where they're at. There's different levels of intense probation, and it's I have to have residents, and I don't necessarily do office contacts anymore. I used to a lot, but now I do the vast majority in the field. So I will see them at their house or at work or in somewhere else in the community service. So we do. I have a lot of telephone contact with the people I supervise.
Gotcha.
On a daily basis, probably for the most part. Except for the ones that have been on for a significant amount of time, they've really learned to structure everything themselves,
Gotcha.
and they don't need that constant contact. And then I'm seeing them very frequently, so I get to know them extremely well. I get to know their families really well
Right.
because I'm around a lot.
Yeah, a lot of direct contact with your parolee, of course. You talk a little bit about that intensive parole. Obviously, they need approval. So if they've got a job, it would be, hey, I'm going to be at this job from this time to this time, then I'm going to be at my house from this time to this time. Now, I myself, obviously not on probation, so I have the freedom to kind of go wherever I want. But I do somewhat live a structured life just because of my job, and we'll touch upon this when we come back. But I'm just, we'll take a little break here, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about intensive probation, because I'm curious as to how, if I wanted to go to the grocery store real quick, do I have to contact you? And we'll talk a little bit about that. So here's what we'll do. We'll take a break, but when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Yavapai County Adult Probation Senior Officer Paul Ventura. I got rid of the repetitive adult probation in your title. But when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be on parole and some of the things that they can and cannot do right here on Countywide. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Who doesn't dream of home improvements? Perhaps your kitchen, the real living room. Maybe the bathroom, where you bookend your day. Langstrand Contracting is your one-stop shop from tear down to finishing touches. With 35 years of experience, Chris and his team will work with you to match your family's style and budget. Call Langstrand Contracting today for guidance in bringing your vision to life.
Hi, this is Greg at Verde Solar Power. Arizona has lots of clean, renewable sunshine, and we want to help you take advantage of it with our quality solar installations, and we offer to beat any written offer on a residential solar electric system. So bring us your electric bill and let us show you how solar power will save you money. We're located conveniently here in the Verde Valley and are dedicated to helping the valley go solar. So remember, the energy solution comes up every morning.
Starting in the late 1920s, Grandpa Gettle and his brothers laid the groundwork for what would become a family legacy. Almost 100 years and 100 patents later, Gettle's High Desert Mechanical continues to raise the bar of quality heating, cooling, and plumbing products and services in the Verde Valley.
Call Gettle's High Desert Mechanical Heating, Air Conditioning, and Plumbing at 567-2200 or online at GettlesHDM.com, providing solutions for your comfort. Don't settle, get Gettles.
I want to welcome you back here to Countywide. On today's show, we are talking about the probation process, and our guest in studio today is Yavapai County Adult Probation Senior Officer Paul Ventura. We talked a little bit about what probation is, and before we went to break, we were talking a little about what Mr. Ventura does, which is intensive probation. You talked a little bit before I interrupted you about just kind of what it is to be on intensive probation. You're obviously going and making direct contact with your parolee a lot more frequently than the other two forms of probation, which are obviously a little less severe. This is the most severe version of probation, like you said before we went to break, where you're constantly checking in. But I had a question, just sort of like, obviously, a schedule needs to be structured. You talked about that, where you're kind of creating a schedule. You're going to be here at this time. You're going to be back home at this time. And if you're not at these places at this time, we're going to have a problem because who knows what's going on. But I'm curious, things come up, going to the grocery store, maybe you need to go to the emergency room. Mm-hmm. Is it a phone call to you first and then, hey, I'm going to these places? Or is it, hey, I went here from this time to this time?
And that is a really good question because real life happens.
Of course.
And so, what I tell everybody is there's two ways that they can be off schedule, and that is a employment change. So their boss asks them to come in early or leave later. Mm-hmm. They leave me a voicemail and say, this is what's happening, or an emergency. So I have to go to the hospital. We'll go to the hospital, call me after.
Right.
That type of thing. If it's anything else, legitimately anything else, they have to call and get verbal approval from me.
Wow.
So they might leave a voicemail, and what I tell them right up front is, I might not call you back, and it doesn't mean I didn't hear the voicemail. It might mean I want you to make sure you're sticking to what you're putting down. A lot of people, especially when they've come to intensive probation, they've been through the system mm-hmm. more than once, and what they lack is structure. And so impulsivity really ties in with someone committing a crime or doing something that's not a positive thing. So negative behaviors and impulsivity come together. Mm-hmm. So to kind of get away from the impulsive actions, we say this is a structured schedule you have to abide by. And I don't like to give those little things at first because I want them to really be strict with themselves. So that down the road, because I'm not going to be there.
Right.
Someone else has, and they need to be able to do it for themselves and say, I'm not going to do this because I wasn't planning to do it to begin with. Mm-hmm. If it's stopping to get gas, no one would ever know. Stopping to get a drink or a pack of cigarettes or whatever happens to be, I'm never going to know that. But if it's to go to the grocery store, which could take an hour, mm-hmm. and I actually show up to the house at that point, then it's a violation of their probation.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that just because they have one violation that they're going to prison or I'm bringing them back to court or even that they go to jail. But it's not good. And those things do add up.
Okay.
And so we want to negate that as much as possible.
I don't know. Obviously don't get too much into specifics, but just real quick, what have been like one of the more extreme cases you've dealt with a parolee? And then have you ever seen, how many people have you seen kind of come out of the probation process much better than where they started?
Extreme cases as in bad?
Yes. Where maybe it was, you say you go to their houses a lot. I mean, has there been any like hostile situations? I mean, have you, again, I don't know how specific you can get.
Yeah, I mean, I can get fairly specific. A few. So I started my career in Flagstaff, and I was there for a little over 7.5 years. I've been a probation officer for 16 years, and I've been in Yavapai County since then. Okay. I used to supervise sex offenders on intensive probation. So out of my 16 years, 13 of those 12 and a half have been in IPS.
Okay.
Where back then it was very different. It was, we contacted people 4 or 5 times a week.
Gotcha.
As opposed to once or twice a week. And with sex offenders, it's a very different personality type, and you have to really learn how to speak with them. I actually supervised someone who was in the state hospital for a while being evaluated as a sexually violent predator, and he was extremely violent. He had outbursts constantly. He was extremely difficult to deal with. And he ripped his hair out in my office once.
Wow.
Like very odd things where that was his way of lashing out. I had been to residences right after something has happened. This is where the danger of my job comes in.
Right.
You don't know what's happening prior to going. The most dangerous situation for any law enforcement person is domestic violence. I can show up to a house right after it's happened and not know. Like, we don't know that going into it. We carry guns just like police officers. I'm actually a firearms instructor as well. And so you're walking into a situation that could be extremely dangerous at that point. I had a couple in Flagstaff that were like that, where I walked into the situation, didn't realize that it just happened. It didn't end up bad for me, thankfully. Then there was another where we showed up to a house. I was with someone else, and the door was open. The car was still running. It's a very odd situation. So you want to clear the house, so you have to draw your weapon, go in, clear the house. He had a dog. He was telling us he was going to let the dog out after us. And
wow.
Like it was pretty crazy, but it ended up good. We talked him out. He didn't even have a dog.
Okay.
Like there was,
Had a cat.
yeah, right. And there's some of those. Truthfully, it's you go to places where the hair on the back of your neck stands up a little bit, and it's sketchy, and you want to follow those instincts. And the biggest difference between us and police are police have to go in.
Okay.
If they get called to a thing, they don't get to back out.
Gotcha.
And I've been in things with police where we've worked together. And then there's circumstances for us where we might put ourselves in there and it's a bad situation. That was probably the other worst one. Is we had someone barricade themselves. Me and a friend of mine who's a police officer went to go arrest him together. I said, it's going to be easy, and afterwards I'll buy you a drink. We go, he barricades himself with his girlfriend, and then we end up with guns drawn for 4 hours, and SWAT has to come in to get him out. And really what got him out was the dog, the canine. They said, we're going to send in the dog. And this is after 4 or 5 hours of a standoff. And when he heard that, he came out.
He was done, yeah. It was the dog the guy didn't have, yeah. It was his dog.
So those things are stressful, intense, but I think you get used to it. And some POs go through their whole career and never experience anything like that.
Yeah, because you talked about showing up door to door for some of these, the intensive probation people, and I'm sure there are many stories that you have of the opposite, which is where you've visited somebody who has horrible offenses and they kind of come out of it on the bright side. They get that structure in their schedule. They figure their stuff out. But yeah, no, when you mentioned that you go door to door, I was just curious if you have ran into, and I assumed a little bit that you had, but if you had run into any of those really kind of intense situations.
Right, and there's probably another couple dozen.
Right.
That after a while it just doesn't hit you as hard. I think the thing that keeps people going are the ones that come out of it on the other side. Right. And I literally just last week had someone show up to the office randomly and told the front desk secretary, I want to talk to Paul. And she's like, oh, you're on his caseload? And he said, no, but I've been sober for 5 years and I wanted to talk to him and tell him thank you. And
how nice.
And so I just happened to be there, and I walked up, and she's like, that guy outside. So I went outside, and I talked to him, and it was really good to see someone do so well. And you'll have those people that say, hey, you saved my life. And you're like, well, I didn't really save your life. I just guided you through something. Right. You did all the work, and in the heavy lifting, they have to literally change their lives. Yeah. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, too, and sometimes professionals, even officers, that the day someone gets sentenced, they could have been living their life one way this day. Mm-hmm. The next day is the day they get sentenced to probation, and literally at that point we're saying, change everything about you. Mm-hmm. You cannot be this person anymore. Right. And if you do, we're going to send you to prison. And That's harsh, and it's a big slap in the face. And so we have to take that into account when we're dealing with people, and you cannot come down with a hard fist all the time saying, do this, do this, do this. They've got to learn, and they've got to make some mistakes. And then hopefully they learn from all that, and they come out on the other side, and they've changed some part of their life, and they learn.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll keep talking about probation here on Countywide with Yavapai County Adult Probation Senior Officer Paul Ventura. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Terrifying jobs. Bull Rider, take 2.
Cliff, this seems like a really terrifying job. Why do you do it?
I love protecting the bull riders when they get bucked up.
How big are these bulls?
12 to 2,200 pounds of pure muscle.
You're not cowed by any of this, obviously. Is there anything that scares you?
Yeah, distracted drivers terrify me.
Two things we can count on every year.
A new set of tax rules and great weather here in northern Arizona.
Jackson Hewitt Tax Service, locally owned and operated by Lewis Rice since 1997, is here for you all year long.
Your neighborhood Jackson Hewitt Tax Office will help you in all of your taxing situations.
Electronic filing is always free with your tax preparation at Jackson Hewitt Tax Service.
Get more in return. Call 1-800-234-1040 for an office near you.
The EPA says C&B Construction ranks in the top 1% nationally. C&B Construction invites you to see what energy efficiency and indoor air quality can be. We have won another Department of Energy Innovation Award, and C&B Construction is the only contractor in the country to win 6 consecutive EPA Indoor Air Plus awards. Experience our zero-energy, move-in ready homes at Crossroads at Mingus.
C&B Construction, locally respected, nationally recognized. Find out more at C&B Homes.com.
Award-winning Soundbites Grill is an entertainment restaurant located in Uptown Sedona at the Hyatt Pinion Point Resort. Open for lunch and dinner, featuring fresh fish, all-natural hand-cut beef, even a full vegan menu. Family-friendly, open 11:30 to 9, late dining on Friday and Saturday. Soundbites Grill has some of the best views of the Sedona Red Rocks. Offers world-class entertainment, food, fun, and music.
I want to welcome you back to Countywide. On today's show, we are talking with Yavapai County Adult Probation Senior Officer Paul Ventura. We've been talking about probation. We talked about his specific form of probation, which is intense probation. Now, before we go, we just got a couple minutes here. Just want to talk a little bit about, how people can get involved. Is there any support, any volunteer programs, any way that people can help probation, or any programs that people should know about if they're on probation? I just want to leave it a little bit more positive note.
Yeah, I think that right now, if I was to say, okay, the place I would want to go and either spend my money or spend my time would be the Verde Valley Homeless Coalition. During COVID especially, the amount of homeless probationers has gone up. Mm-hmm. Being homeless at all is very difficult, but being homeless and having to have a lot of responsibility is extremely difficult. Yeah. That's a great place. It's a great program. They do a lot to help people. There's Al-Anons where you could go and you can help support people who are a part of the sober community. They do different throughout the year. Last year was a little different, but they do different sober events, and they need money for that kind of stuff, obviously. For us specifically, we take AmeriCorps volunteers, and which gives them a little bit of they helps us, mm-hmm. obviously, and it gives them some experience. And we also take internships from schools, which is also kind of like free work for us. But they get the experience and they get to see the other side of things. But the other thing, like we were just talking about, is getting people early on. And so if they can do something in the community where it's affecting the kids in school, high school and middle school and elementary school, that helps, because that can deter them from going on. And Big Brothers Big Sisters is also a really good program too that kind of moves kids into the right direction.
Paul, thank you very much for coming in and talking about your job and talking about probation. If you do want more information about the Adult Probation Office here in Yavapai County, www.yavapai.us/APO. You can also give them a call at 928-771-3332. That is going to do it for this episode of Countywide. I'm Philip Catalfamo, wishing you a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you again next time.